Good afternoon, YouTube. Welcome to my second live discussion, and today we are talking about management for reactive dogs. So, management is the process of not training but setting up situations so that problematic behaviors don't occur. Tricky situations don't happen. So, for example, if you had a dog that bit men, not exposing it to men. That's a very obvious example, but it's an example of management. So, management isn't actively training the dog, but setting situations up so that when you are training, it's more likely to be effective. And um, meaning, if you're not in a space to train, if your dog's not in a space to train, either with time, money, treats, um, or like emotionally, if either of you need like a rest day or something, management would be what steps into place instead of training, and means that when you aren't training, if your dog is potentially going to be exposed to a trigger, that their behavior doesn't get any worse. So this is really important for reactive dogs because every time they see their trigger and are reactive to them, that behavior is being reinforced. The reactive behavior is being reinforced. If we can make sure that our dog doesn't see a trigger, their behavior can't get any worse. No, it's not going to fix the problem, but equally, it's not going to make it get any worse. And it also means that your training doesn't get undone. So if you've done 8 hours of training and your dog is exposed to their trigger for an hour and is reactive the whole time, that hour is going to undo some of the work you did in those 8 hours of training. So essentially, you would have done 7 hours of training. That's a very, very reductionist view, but it is an example of how management, and then if you managed for that 1 hour where the trigger was present, you may still have 8 hours, you may have 7.5 hours versus losing your full hour of the incorrect thing being learned, the thing you don't want to be being learned. It's also really important for trigger stacking. So trigger stacking is the process where individual stressors pile up on top of each other and make a dog more likely to react. Now, it's really important to remember that good stress contributes to trigger stacking. So, anything that takes our bodies away from baseline, that like our neutral zone in our body, chemically, hormones, all of that is a stressor. So if you feel the need to go to a toilet, to the toilet, not to a toilet, that is stressful. And you could argue that, like, whilst I'm sat at my desk and I'm doing admin, if I feel the need to go to the loo, that's not that stressful. It's a mild stressor. But if you are on an airplane and the seatbelt sign is on and it's a very pressing need to go to the toilet, that's incredibly stressful. And I think we can all agree that that's not those two feelings. Yes, they're created by the same underlying need, but one is a mild stressor, one is a very, very serious stressor. And if you take a child to Disneyland, they are stressed. They're having the time of their lives. They're having a really, really great time, but their bodies are so far away from baseline that they are stressed. They're having a great time. They're enjoying it, but it is chemically stress. So trigger stacking takes all of this into account. And if you've got a dog that is reactive and out and about on walks that you go on every single day, you are likely to see something that causes them extreme distress, so bad stress. Then you need to make sure that they've got a chance for those chemicals to flood out of their body before you then see a trigger again. Because if their stress levels are going up where they're going to react no matter what happens, then that's not ideal. And your dog is just going to learn to react and react and react worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So, by managing a situation, if you know that your dog is starting to get trigger stacked, or on a walk you've had a few bad experiences out of your control and it's now time to manage rather than train until you're back home and safe, then that's really, really important. And it's also really important to understand management so that you can plan how to do things. If your dog has been to the vets and they hate going to the vets, you probably don't want to walk them like an hour later. But if your dog is going to need exercise in that time, assuming the vets have signed them off for that, then you're going to need to understand some management that you can use instead of simply walking your dog to tire them out. Management should be personal to all dogs as well. So how I manage Pumba, one terrier, in comparison to how I manage Timon, his brother, in comparison to how I manage Sonic, the 9-month-old Aussie, Those are all completely different dogs. And when I work with clients, I manage their I manage my clients' needs and I manage the dog's needs completely individually. So I don't put out management plans for the same for two different dogs in the same way. If you've got a dog who, jumping back to the trigger stacking, the consensus on how long it takes stress hormones to leave our bodies is everywhere from 3 hours to 3 days. So it really depends on how intense the stressor is and the individual that you're working with. So Pumba, he can be stressed, but okay. We've had some people rethatching the house next door to us where our garden faces, and that's been a stressor for him. But he's able to go out on a walk and see a dog without that causing a reaction. But if he were to be in a classroom with a dog barking, that would probably trigger a reaction from him, and it probably wouldn't if the Thatchers hadn't been there. So I know that I need to manage Pumba if a specific situation arises with other dogs out and about. But if we just see a dog out on the other side of the road, or if we see a dog in a field, that's not going to be a problem. With Timon, if he's stressed, he cannot see any dogs. He will react. It will be excessive. It will be really, really stressful for him. And Timon is the sort of dog that gets stressed by sort of daily life. When we've moved house previously, he has had to be completely isolated from moving boxes, and we've had to take things out of the rooms that he's in very slowly, very carefully, so sort of like a shelf at a time, so that he doesn't completely go, oh my god, my entire world has disappeared. And if you're doing something like moving house, Timon needs to be managed very heavily because he's getting close to being trigger stacked. And with Sonic, she's coming up, and I think her season is due. 3 of her sisters have come in, 2 in the last week. And she's been very choppy and changey and weird and wonderful. And I think those hormones are coming in, and I think we're getting ready for our first season. And sometimes she sees dogs and she's absolutely fine, literally no reactions whatsoever, just the normal dog that we've always had. Sometimes she sees a dog and it's reaction out of seemingly nowhere. I know it isn't out of nowhere. I know there's a whole bunch going on internally to cause that, but it's very difficult for us to manage at the moment because we don't I especially I don't know what dog I'm taking out. Sometimes I step out the front door and we see a dog and she's absolutely fine. Sometimes we step out the front door, she sees a dog and she's not fine. Sometimes it's with Pumba, sometimes it's when she's alone. Yeah, it's very hard to manage that. So I need to have all of my management tools in my back pocket. And if at the moment my car's broken, so I can't do something like manage her by driving, where we're less likely to see dogs on roads and more likely to see dogs where we've got more space and we can cope with them a little bit better. So I'm having to go on our usual walk, and the road we live on where we can get to off lead walks is fabulous. It's 3 minutes from our house to that path, but those 3 minutes on the road we live on are very intense 3 minutes, and you could see 20 dogs in that time. So I need to be ready to hide her through things, feed her just for dogs passing, which isn't training. So I'm not expecting her to learn anything from that. I'm literally just giving her something else to do other than barking. A bit like if you had a child and you went for a lunch, and instead of them pestering or making loud noises and doing generally unsocially acceptable things, or socially unacceptable things, giving them a colouring book and some pens and pencils to interact with, rather than just giving them nothing and expecting them to sit still and quietly like an adult can. I'm just going, yeah, here's your pen and pencils, there you go, have fun with that whilst this dog passes, and then we'll carry on. So at the moment, Sonic is really, really testing my management skills. But it's with her trigger stacking, I could take her out the next day and she could be absolutely fine and not need those skills. So you really need to make sure that you're looking at your dog and identifying the management that they need. If they have a reaction, do they need a whole day off? Do they need to go and have a nap? Or do they need 2 days off? Or is it a case, much as I may say, for my dogs, they need this, this, and this, those are my dogs. And between my 3 dogs, they have very different management tactics. And if one of them does get time off, does get a day off or anything like that, it's personal to that dog in front of me based on what they've gone through, rather than a blanket rule of you're having a day off for this, this, and this every time a dog barks at you. So I've mentioned a few management tactics throughout this talk, but I'm going to give you a few more. Really common one is a day off, otherwise known as a cortisol holiday. Cortisol is one of the main stress hormones, and it's just giving it a chance for that to come out of the body, give the body a chance to reset, have a day without the stress hormone present so that normal services can resume, and then you go back out again. I personally think these can be overused in the modern dog training industry. I don't think every dog needs them. Some dogs do, 100% some dogs do. And I think you can do half days off much more effectively, but I don't necessarily think full days off are required as much as we think they are. So this is where if your dogs have had a really, really extreme, if your dog's been attacked, I may recommend a day off. If your dog's had a reaction on their morning walk, as long as they've had a sleep, they've had some enrichment, they've had some training, they've had a nice time at home, and as long as they aren't a dog that's really, really frantic and potentially a candidate for psychopharmacology, then they might be all right for a walk in the afternoon or the evening. As long as it's not like 2 hours later, then they may be fine. And it's one where if it was a mild reaction where a dog barked to them from across a field, then give it a go. If it was a more serious reaction where someone ran into your dog as you stepped out the front door, then that might be worth a day off. But it's very dependent on the dog and on the context of what's happened, rather than there was a reaction, therefore you're having a whole day off. That said, if your dog is being significantly worse and you cannot pinpoint why, so a bit like with Sonic, where I can take her out one day, she's not reactive at all. I can take her out another and she'll bark at every dog she sees. Then it may be worth giving them a day off just to see if that helps them out and helps reset them a little bit. If you've gone from 0 to 100, then that's a potential for a good day off, rather than waiting and seeing what happens, sort of thing. Another form of management is hiding from triggers. So this is one that I like to use if you've been out on a walk and you've had a few reactions and it's all starting to go a bit pear-shaped, but you're still half an hour away from home and you've got to manage to get back. Hiding behind trees, like jumping off of paths into, if you're in a forest, jumping off the path into the undergrowth, hiding behind cars if you're on road, so using cars to block the vision of other dogs, is a great one. I'm assuming that the dog is reactive to other dogs, but obviously you can use this with people as well. And being more proactive about keeping people away from your dog. So if your dog needs space and someone's walking right at you, where if your dog wasn't trigger stacked and didn't need management, that you could maybe you wouldn't ask the person to walk away. You would maybe walk past them and use lots of treats for that. But they are now very trigger stacked and the dog's struggling. You ask the person to move away with their dog or wait for you to come past or something like that. So you may be slightly more socially proactive about how you request help from other people out and about. And simply turning the other way. If you see something and go, nope, not today, turn around, go the other way, find a different route home. Not always possible, but it's a great form of management. Feeding your dog to get through a situation rather than training it. This is one that it's not a case of you are effectively training your dog, but if you throw a handful of treats on the floor before your dog sees the dog and your dog is busy eating, and the other dog can get past without your dog seeing them necessarily, that can be something that can help you manage and avoid a reaction going further. And other really obvious management tools are things like leads. If your dog is going to run across a field to go and tell off other dogs, put them on lead. They cannot go and run off across a field if they're on lead, and assuming you're holding the other end of the lead. If your dog is bite risk, muzzling them. So things like physical management as well. If you've got a dog that's reactive to people and you've got loads of people over, this is a really common discussion around Christmas time. But if you've got loads of people over and your dog's a bit reactive to people, putting them in another room and locking that room so that no one can accidentally walk in, and you can give your dog some time. It's not a case of you're shutting them out of the activities. It's just a case of you're giving them some time in a room nice and quietly to decompress, come back to baseline and really, really reset and figure themselves out again. It's really obvious things like just simply not letting situations happen, and going, if you're in any doubt and you know you can't train through it, just simply avoiding the situation. So those are my top tips for reactive dogs. I hope I've explained to you why they're important. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to comment, let me know, or send me an email to emma@paws paw-by-paw-training.co.uk. If you want to request a topic for next week, by all means put that in the comments. It can be other things like recall puppy training, whatever it is. I'm trying to help reactive dog owners. So if I'm coming up with a topic myself, it's going to be more behavioral or behaviorally inclined in terms of the work. But absolutely, if you want a recall discussion here, I can absolutely do that. You just need to let me know. And I will see you next week. Have a good one, guys.